Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as my usual intro goes. We are going to be diving into the readings for this module, which are looking at the various ways to deconstruct and look at deviance from different perspectives, both symbolic interactionalism, structural functionalism, and conflict theory. So this week, we will dive deeper into the sociological theories used to explain deviance, as I was just alluding to. First up, what we're going to do is start with one of the most prolific and probably most famous theorists inside sociology, depending upon whom you find to be connecting to your opinions, right? So this could be Marx for those of you who are conflict theory, but for here, we're going to dive into Emile Durkheim's work around deviance. So first things first, Durkheim being a functionalist and being one of the prolific theorists, viewed as one of the founding fathers. Durkheim is known for the fathering of structural functionalism, among many other things. He wrote much about crime in society, and we have learned a lot from his approach about normative and non-normative behavior within society as a whole. Now, Durkheim analyzed how societies with high social integration, which we talked about in our other lecture, or a lot of bonding with each other, have conformity and less deviance. So they bond and they're accountable to each other, so there's less deviating from a norm. Essentially, Durkheim, as we talked about last lecture, referred to this as anomy. The term anomy refers to a sense of normalness when people lose their sense of belonging and no longer feel connected to one another. There's very many different types of anomic responses, but this idea of normalness creates this idea that norms then become less defined, and deviance is more likely to occur. Now, Durkheim argues that deviance occurs in all societies. As the slide says, all societies have crime, right? So he views that this, to him, it is necessary and a component of social life. If society were full of saints, Durkheim says, that there would still be crime. It would just occur in slight deviations from the norm. How powerful is that? So think about that. In a world of saints, there would still be deviance and crime. In a world of saints, we would just have to restructure what it means to be criminal or deviant. So it would just occur with slight deviations from the norm. Crazy, right? Now, Durkheim also considered deviance and crime to be necessary because it functions for those whom conform, right? He had this idea that Durkheim talked with mechanical and organic solidarity. We used to use more extreme measures, mechanical, towards how we would tell someone to not do this, right? Think about thieves having their hand cut off. That's an extreme example, right? But no one's going to want to do theft if there was a direct person you know that was impacted by this. Times have changed in this organic society in the post-industrial revolution, right? In this post-industrial era. Now, if you do something bad, think about this, you get canceled. How many times have you, ask yourself this question, not done something for fear of getting canceled, which is the modern day equivalent to putting a barrier up, right? Some people tiptoe around their opinions because they're worried about if their norms are going to regulate or going to be unregulated or not follow, aka deviate, right? When someone is deviant, the rest of society is reminded what is acceptable and what is unacceptable behavior. Now, whereas Durkheim built on this, Merton, who we talked a little bit about last lecture, ties to this idea even further, ties to this belief that all of society responds in certain ways, right? So on this slide, what you'll see is his idea or his typology. Merton extends Durkheim's ideas of anomy, of the state of normalness that occurs when the social structure breaks down and becomes unstable. When the social structure breaks down and becomes unstable. When people are excluded from being able to legitimately obtain their goals, they may choose an alternate means to get it, right? So we might, I want what I want, but I can't get it legally, right? So I'm going to use a different way to get this. It is through the relationship with the social structure that Merton defines his types or typologies of how individuals adapt to it. When we accept the goals of society and agree on accept the legitimate means to meet those goals, we are conformists, which has no deviance associated. However, not everyone in the social structure can adapt this way. Now, Merton described 5 types, and these were, as you can see on your screen, they are how we respond, including conformity, innovation, ritualism, retreatism, and rebellion. And this ties to the idea of the social structure and our acceptance or rejection of the goals and legitimate ways to meet them or gain them. So let's look a little bit about this idea of a cultural goal. Let's make an easy one, say cash rules everything around me, right? We all want money to get the things that we want. So let's say the goal is to be rich. So let's say that I love the work that I get to do as an instructor, which I do. And I get paid for doing that job. I receive a paycheck for the things that I need for items that I need to present this information. Therefore, I decide to accept the cultural goal of making money, and I accept the legitimate means. I work in a profession that is socially acceptable to get. Therefore, I would be an example of a conformist. If I decide that I want that money to pay for things, accept the goal, but I don't have legitimate means, times are tough, times are getting hard to get, right? A person in this case may find illegal ways to get that money. Now, there are ways that I could do this, use your imagination, but all must not be approved ways of getting money per society's views and structures. And in this case, I'd be an innovator because I'd accept the cultural goal, but not an acceptable means or ways to get it. You can also be an innovator if you want to succeed, but do not approve of the way to achieve that success, such as with tech icons who disrupted the industries and made radical changes, such as Uber CEO, and such as the well-known Bill Gates and his innovations and creation with Microsoft and the internet. I personally worked in my years of sales and marketing for a company called ZocDoc in my early years, and their model changed the healthcare industry, and setting up appointments and sharing paperwork was disruptive and was an innovation at its finest. Very interesting when you tie it to this idea of the typology category of innovation, right? Just changing the ways to get something is seen as breaking the norms. You could be it in a positive or albeit in a negative, right? Now, if I didn't really care about making money, like I am from a wealthy family or my partner makes oodles and oodles of cash, right? I might go along with the goal of making money, but I still decide, I might not go along with the goal of making money, my apologies, but I still decide to have a job, right? I'd be a ritualist. Essentially, I would be going through the motions of the culturally acceptable means, even though I don't care about the goal. Have you ever heard someone say that they got married because it was expected and they have had kids because that was the next step? And you've also heard them say that they never wanted them either. Well, they would be ritualizing their life stages to follow the process. And they don't really necessarily want it themselves, but they wouldn't want to stray from the norm. So they are ritualizing the life process. Now, let's say I decide to remove myself from the whole idea of making money. Let's say I move to Sedona and start to live off of the mystical land and live off grid in a remote location and forage for food and all that good stuff, such as shelters and more. I would be rejecting both the goals and the means, and I would be a retreatist. You can also do this in another example. Think of those who suffer from drug addiction, who reject the goals of making money and contributing to society to get money, and are looking to score however they can to escape in an altered state of mind and relieve the pain they are going through or fill the habit they have developed. They are also seen as retreatists. You can also tie to the idea of people whom are homeless, right? They serve their country many times. Vets are homeless. They come back here and they're rejected, so they live on the streets. There's many ways to go down this category. Now, finally, if I reject the goals and the means of making money for a new goal and means, I would fall into the category of rebellion, in which I reject the standards of norm now and want to create something more suited to those like me, or what is best for my personal circumstances. This category is very interesting, has many different personality types within it, but is one that makes them much more turn away from the resources, utilities, and benefits of society and want to create new norms and goals. And if you push against society, it'll push right back at you. This is also where you see social change advocates fall into, such as civil rights activists. So for Merton, it's our connection to the social structure that determines how we conform, or if we break the social norms. We're conformists, innovatives, ritualists, retreatists, rebellion, right? These areas play to how we feel the means are obtainable. Now, the idea of Sutherland and Cressy's differential association theory is a theory that people are more than likely to be deviant if those close to them are. You may have heard the term Khan Academy somewhere in your life, or the phrase, I learned to be a better criminal when I was in prison. That ties to this theory. If we look at the movie American Gangsta, which is right here, as you can see on the screen, the main character, Frank, both learned criminal behavior when he was young and also learned how to be a drug kingpin by watching and learning from other drug dealers in his circle. You can find many stories of this has been the truth. We learn from our social environment, and if you're surrounded by drug dealers or any type of deviant label groups, you will learn to be more deviant by nurture, which may be the norm of the area. If you need more examples, you can look to the domestic abuse and how we grow up as children and a certain amount of learned behavior expectations by being surrounded by it as said children, which can result in our behavioral pattern of repeating that cycle, or social learning theory is another way to say this. So differential association is fascinating, right? This idea that we learn through the process and then the understanding. Sutherland and Cressy really dive into this idea of we learn our environment. And many times sociology gets debated upon with psychology on, if I stole bread, am I a criminal or am I acting out of desperation? And if you grew up in an environment where you really didn't have a choice, that might be more of the differential association. Now, going into the next slide here, we're going to be covering Hershey. Now, Hershey talks about the idea of social control. Now, collegiate bias aside, it's always kind of cool to know that some of these names we hear and feel are so old and ancient to know them. that Hershey worked for many, many years here in Arizona and worked at University of Arizona whilst working on the idea of control theory. Now, I know as Sun Devils, that might not be that interesting, but think about how little it is that you've actually known somewhere these people have studied, or that they died in the 1800s or 1940s. Hershey's actually someone is relatively new, right? Now, Hershey takes an opposite approach towards explaining deviance. He looks at how people are able to refrain from committing deviant acts based on strong social bonds to society. Essentially, the closer you are to people who follow the rules, the more likely you are also to conform. For instance, we might think about celebrities that have grown up and make different choices in their lives when they get older, such as Selena Gomez, Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears, Noah and Miley Cyrus, or even good old Justin Bieber, which is a big conversation right now. These are examples of celebs who have not continued to conform to the normative identity they once had when they first became famous. You can also point to Harry Styles not conforming to the idea of gender representation, right? Through control theory, we can say that it is because of weakened bonds that someone decides to deviate or not deviate. How connected are you and how much control do you have? Becoming disconnected with norm-abiding people and maybe the wholesome appearance played on television or movies could lead to norm-violating behavior. People get so mad when it's no longer the same person that they grew up with, right? Those with the most to lose stay in line. Those with nothing to lose can be the most dangerous members of society, is another way to look at this. Many times they say if someone with nothing to lose is the most dangerous person, right? If nothing is holding you here, then why aren't you deviating? Why aren't you breaking the rules? So social control theory is this idea that Hershey talks about. Now, pulling into Chelsea Lynn, we're going to talk about the idea of conflict theory and feminist theory. So Chelsea Lynn discusses the importance of analyzing women and men differently when it comes to deviance and crimes. We can't look at it with a myopic approach, right? How men are treated, how women are treated, how men are socialized, how women are socialized. This plays into how we view the world, right? Many women have a bifurcated lens, and they know that society expects them to be nurturing for some reason because of socialization. And they also know that nurturing careers don't pay as handsomely as something as domineering as being a CEO or being a VC, right? Or being in any type of situation. So there's this elements to how we analyze the world around us, and we have to understand what side is which, right? A woman's socialization, or a female-bodied person's socialization about space, taking up space, ways that they act, ways that they're socialized is different than men. And we have to understand that these types of circumstances, whether it be having a replacement self, which your chapter will talk about, through having a child and being able to step away from a deviant idea through having children, isn't something a man can do, right? And when a father becomes a father, it doesn't allow us to replace our sins of our past. But there's something about how we view women in this way that has this altruistic idea of raising a child creates a new identity. That's a whole other conversation for a whole other time. So to her, we can't simply use already developed theories created to analyze men's deviance when we're looking at women, because their experiences are different. And that is very important. Their experiences are different. I hope you enjoy this chapter. And I want to say, as I always say, keep reading, keep posting on Yellowdig, and keep analyzing these patterns, behaviors, and activities from a curious and theoretical approach. As this book will keep getting harder and harder because it'll expect you to know these. You're building the foundation, and then we'll start diving into some really fascinating topics, and I'm looking forward to it. I'll see you in the next lecture.